Welcome to my first Tech Talk. Today I wanted to share information that I found out about using OBS Studio and Windows 10. And let me give you the background as to why I wanted to get into videos and what it was about for me, and the YouTube channel and the whole deal. One day I got up and decided I wanted to learn about video editing, and so I started to do some research, and I realized I needed to get a video capture. I needed to be able to capture video that's happening. I also needed to render that video, and then I needed somewhere to put it so I could share that with people. And the journey isn't about getting those videos up per se, but it's more about learning throughout the process, because I wanted to learn about rendering and streaming and all of this. Right? So I did some basic research, and there's a program called Action Morales, which I apparently own. I bought 5 years ago, didn't really use it at all. There's Bandicam, and there's OBS, which is open source. And when I looked at all three, I thought OBS had the best quality for what I was wanting to do. So that's where I got started, and that's the thinking that I was using. I won't be going, this is not a tutorial about how to use OBS or anything of that nature, because frankly I'm still learning. This is more about the settings that I had to use between OBS and Windows to make it work. And I'll share my hardware configuration, and we go from there into the diagnostic thinking that I went through. Looking at my hardware setup, my CPU is rather old. It's an Intel Core i7-2600K. It's from the Sandy Bridge era. Nothing special here. It is really good. It goes up to 4.3 megahertz, and that's when it's not under full load. Under full load, it gets kind of hot because I'm running the stock cooler on it, because these came with a cooler in the box. 4 cores, 8 threads, and I'll give my rationale as to why I still have this and plans for the future, and probably other tech talks. My main board is the Asus P8P67 Deluxe, which was a great board. It works fine. I've had it for 6 years now, and it works wonderfully. So, and my graphics card is a NVIDIA GTX 1080 Ti, gaming black edition or some such thing. Beautiful card. It does everything you would need to do, and perfect. I'm also running 16 gigabytes of DDR3 dual channel memory. Nothing special on the memory. I think I just at the time had looked for the cheapest memory that would work with the motherboard and bought the 16 gigabytes of RAM. I'm running 2 monitors on my setup currently. My main setup where I run all my games on is a 1609, which is a 2560 by 1440 or 1440p monitor. I run it in landscape mode. And my second monitor is a ultra wide monitor, a 2560 by 1080. Also quite nice. This used to be my main monitor, but it's not a 16:9 aspect ratio, and I did not like how the images looked when it did the rescale, because then I would have to play the game at 16:9 resolutions, and it was really distracting having the edges showing. I hated it, so I got this monitor for the upgrade. It's a beautiful inch. It's a 32-inch monitor. This one, it's a 32-inch monitor, and it's Asus. So nice color, decent speed. I really don't play shooters, so great monitor. So on the EVGA card, the 1080 Ti, using the precision tool, this program that you can get from EVGA, the card never actually hit the 84 degrees that I have it set as. You notice I'm not even stressing the card here. And in World of Tanks at Ultra, you don't hit that either. My case is a Meshify C. Yes, it's a fairly new case, which I put the old motherboard in. And I put two 140mm Noctias on the front and a 120mm Noctia on the back. So it has very good cooling. It is a Meshify C, and this card performs very adequately. There's no issue here. I have kept the curve to quiet, because I don't need to be aggressive on the fan curve. Alright. Okay, so I was using World of Tanks as my test bed, where my goal was that I wanted to run about 100 FPS at the highest settings and still maintain a good 60 FPS recording in OBS. So what I found was that I'm running the PB328, and I'll cover this when I go over my hardware, what kind of monitor that is, but it is this resolution, and it has a frequency of 75. So I needed this game to work at around over 100 consistently. This is what maximum looks like. This is what it does. Now if I go to the ultra settings, the game runs perfectly fine. What I found though, it runs around the 75 FPS, but then I would get dips into the 50s. I started to notice it, but not really. It really wasn't a problem. It wasn't like there was losing frames per se in terms of actual gameplay. So I decided to keep it at maximum to guarantee that I had headroom. This game is not necessarily pushing the graphics card. What it seems to do is grab a core on the CPU and also use the graphic card, the two of them together, 1.5 cores, or 2 cores in other words, but not fully utilizing the 2 cores. So if I have an i7, and I'll cover that also, and I'll have covered that in the hardware section, perfectly adequate to run this game and do quite a few other things without any hiccups. So let me restate the problem again. I wanted to make sure I could record, render it in YouTube format, and it would look crisp and clear and would be properly represented online. And so based on the hardware that I have, at no time in recording World of Tanks or any other program did I get my CPU topping out at 100%, so I wasn't CPU bound, or my GPU throttling, topping out at 100%, so I was not CPU bound. So in playing the game, it was fine. It was fine. However, when I took that recorded image and looked at it, it was dropping frames, the audio would have crackles on it, and I'll give you examples. If you look on the playlist that I have on the channel for World of Tanks OBS, you will see multiple examples of dropped frame rates, and I put them up so I can show the progression. And there's a T57 video where the audio started to crack, and I think I know why that happened. So as this went on, it was very confusing to me. I could not find the bottlenecks, and this is the holy grail of what I was looking for. What was happening is skip frames due to encoding was always 0, but frames missed due to rendering lag was as high as 10%. I actually saw it go to 20% based on when I was fooling around. And so 20% of my frames were missed due to rendering lag. And the OBS sites all kind of point to GPU issues when this is going on. And so that took me down a long path of strangeness. So let me show you the OBS settings that I'm using now. Nothing in here really was changed on the general tab. I'm not streaming yet, so I haven't really looked at that. But in here on recording, I am recording into the Tech Talk folder. I record on 2 audio tracks. Track 1 is my mic, track 2 is the desktop. I think there's a program I can use where I can just pipe the game or whatever I'm recording directly into a track, so that will be perfect. I'm not rescaling my output, and these are the rate control settings. There's constant bit rate. I'm doing 40,000 because that's more than adequate. High quality, high level auto, and the B frames are at 2 with 2-pass encoding. With audio, I'm doing 44.1. That's perfectly adequate for YouTube. All right. I do set my microphone directly, and I'm doing it in stereo. And for video, I'm taking my native resolution and I'm outputting to my native resolution, and I'm using 32-bit scaling. All right, and I'm capping it at 60 FPS. So earlier, when I was talking, I was making sure that I always had higher than 60 FPS on anything I recorded, and that's one of the reasons why I decided not to maintain the ultra settings, but instead go to the maximum settings. And yes, I do think I'm CPU bound on that because the graphic card is frankly one of the best you can buy. So I do think that back when I bought this 6 years ago, USB 3 was new. I don't think we had very mature chipsets for that, and so I/O was a bottleneck on these older cards. If you get on these older boards, if you get a new board, you're going to get much superior I/O. Additionally, I don't have an aftermarket cooler running on this board, and so I do see World of Tanks in particular pegging 1 core, and I believe that it's doing a mixture of things. It does use 2 cores for some things, but I believe the 1 core individual clock speed is my limiting factor here. But you know, in gameplay, what's the difference? I go to maximum, it doesn't look as nice, but I can't really tell what the difference is in World of Tanks. And I do have plans to upgrade in the future, which I'll talk about in other tech talks. So I spent days looking at YouTube, and eventually I decided, hey, maybe there's a wiki. This is an open source software. Let's go to the developer and see what they say about what I should do in OBS to help solve this issue. And so I went to the wiki, the obsproject.com wiki. And they have a lot of good information here. Quick start guide, overview guide, guide to sources, filters, troubleshooting guides. I went there. And drop frame connections, stream bugs, laptop performance, general performance and encoding issues, GPU overload issues, and so I went through each of these sections, and that was really useful. I looked through these things, I tested it, and of course you can imagine how the test goes. You have to make the change, you have to make one change, then you have to go into your game which you're having the problem with, and you have to test. And it may look fine, because the problem is you don't notice it until you finish and then go and get the video file and look at it. You're not dropping any frames in the game at all. It's only on your recording. Alright, so this was a problem. So eventually I went to the general performance and encoding issues, because as I showed you before, it was a rendering issue that seemed to be my problem. So it says it's a very CPU intensive operation. Nope, I didn't have that because I was using my GPU for this. Alright, I did not want to downscale my output resolution because I wanted to record in the 1440p and then use my rendering software to do the downscale. I did not want to do it in OBS, because when I did this, it started to look a lot like Action to me. Everything's a little fuzzy, a little blurry. When I keep it at the native, it very much looks better in my mind. Could just be me. The next thing it told me to do was to lower my frame rate. So I'm like, well, how do you do that? So how you have to do that is you go into your program that you're recording and you tell it to be capped. Say don't go above 60 or don't go above 30 frames per second or whatever. And that usually really helps OBS to handle itself better. So if I'm pushing 130 frames per second, then I can be sending more frames to OBS than it can process, because you're only really saving it. Your output is at 60 frames, and so if you cap your input to 60, then the program can handle it better. And this seemed to have helped. So I did a number of videos, but when I looked at them properly, it was still dropping frames. And another annoying aspect of it is when you are in bordered windowless mode, you cannot cap your frames. So I now had to go to full screen mode. So if I moved around between the two monitors, it wanted to minimize. This was not ideal. I was not happy. So change your X264 preset. Now, this is something I played around with as well, and it really didn't apply to me because of this next one. I'm using an NVIDIA card, and NVIDIA has a built-in encoder to all their GPUs from, I think, from the any 10 series, even from the 9 series. It's built in. So once you tell it to use that, it is going to use your video hardware to encode. And this is video cards are made for this. Perfect. Check your sources, upgrade your hardware, and I did look here too as well. I'm like, wow, maybe I just can't do it. Maybe I need to actually pull the trigger on on my CPU and get something faster. Or maybe I need to get a capture card. So I spent some time looking at capture cards. And capture cards aren't necessarily for encoding or decoding. All they essentially do is take video from one machine and move it to another machine, and then you can do all your recording on the other machine. However, Elgato makes a PCIe capture card which has an encoder on it. I believe it's the only one. Mostly all other capture solutions are moving signals from one machine to another, and that's where you get your best performance from. So that's why people run multiple machines if they're doing this capture business. If your machine is you know, if you're a professional streamer, I imagine this would suit you because you don't want a recording to mess up your stream, so you would have a separate piece of hardware, another machine, where you capture your sources on. So I started to look into that. Can I actually use a capture card to record locally, and would that in fact get rid of my stuttering issues? And I could not come to a definite solution if this would help solve the problem. So, you know, close other programs. But again, as I've stated, I wasn't having CPU or GPU bottleneck issues overall in the system. I had free cores, I had free threads, I could move around, everything else was running fine except OBS and recording. So the next thing I looked at was is my GPU overloaded? Because the rendering, when I looked at the view stats that I showed you from OBS, it was definitely seeming that the GPU was overloaded. However, everything was telling me it was not overloaded. It was behaving very normally. Much like a CPU, if something wants resources, it spikes up to 80% usage, and then it spikes back down, and it goes between a sweet spot. It wasn't up to 99% or 100% and staying there fully. All right. My game, here we go. My game frame rate is fine, but OBS can't keep up. This is probably because you've overloaded your GPU. I wasn't seeing that. but that was the symptom. But when I looked at the GPU, it just wasn't happening. So I tried to force it to use the CPU, and trust me, the GPU is much faster. So how do I stop my GPU from being overloaded? You know, generic advice here, give it less work. They come back to limit the frame rate, which we discussed already. Lower your game graphics settings, which I did because I wanted to make sure it was consistently 60 frames per second. And ironically, something else I read was, you know, if I'm sending the 100 and odd into it and it needs to go to 60, that could be a problem of the halting. So it's kind of ironic that if I limited it, it would work better. So disable OBS game capture multi-adaptive capability. That doesn't apply to me. And then this. Windows 10, I believe, at the Creators Edition, enabled a game mode. And this game mode you can get to by, and this took me a while to research, alright? So if you know anything about OSs, an OS is supposed to schedule all programs running in your OS equally. And Microsoft, in its infinite wisdom, decided that it was going to give games additional resources because somehow your system is not balanced and you needed to make sure your game was running better. Alright? So this was, I dismissed it out of hand because I was saying, why would a properly built OS need to prioritize a game over everything else? If I don't want everything else to run equally, I would shut those things down. I want them to run equally. So how do you get into game mode to see what's going on? And essentially you hit the Windows key plus G. Yeah, this is a game. So, oh, it's not showing up on OBS. Let me snip it for you, and I'll add an overlay after. Okay, so Windows game mode, you get the Windows key plus G, and this thing pops up. And this button right here, that thing that looks like the satellite dish where my cursor is moving, if that is enabled, game mode is active for your game or your program that you're running. And what I found was that World of Tanks had that enabled. Now I don't know if I had enabled it as a test, or if it figured out that was a game and enabled it. I can't give you that history, but it was enabled. I then turned it off and tried out the recording again, and lo and behold, I had no more rendering issues. I know I'm under 0.1%, and those are usually happening in transition times. So you're going from within the game back into the garage, and you usually lose 1 frame in that issue, 1 or 2 frames. So over an hour period, you may lose 4 frames, and it's no longer an issue. And I'm talking about weeks of issues here trying to figure out this problem. And so that is the whole reason I made this video, that this one little thing here in this section, the Windows 10 game mode, in the GPU overload issue, is where I found a solution. And I still don't see why the GPU is overloaded, because mine was not when I was doing the measurements of it. So I hope this is helpful, and I hope other people will see this. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you saw, please leave a comment. Let's have a discussion on this. Let's hear your problems with OBS and Windows 10 game mode. Thank you. Please remember to subscribe. Hit that like button if you liked the video, and leave a comment. If you didn't like the video, well, you can hit the dislike button. Thank you.